Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Feeney, and I'm an assistant professor in the Integrated Marketing Communications program. And we are absolutely delighted to have a very special guest with us today. Dick Starmann is here. He's going to talk about his career and his experiences and his background and things, but let me tell you just a little bit about him. He grew up in Chicago, came to Ole Miss in the mid-1960s, graduated in 1968 with a degree in both journalism and marketing, so I had a dual degree. While he was here, he was managing editor of the Daily Mississippian, and the editor at the time was actually Charles Overby, who is also in this room. And at that time, the position for editor was actually an elected position, and I hear it was quite a spirited contest to see who became editor. But Charles was editor, you were managing editor, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that. But while Dick was here, he was also in the ROTC program, and as I mentioned, graduated in 1968, served very honorably in Vietnam for a couple of years as a first lieutenant, and then in 1972 joined McDonald's Corporation. He started as a regional advertising manager for the southern part of the United States, and over the next 27 years had a very distinguished career, worked his way up through marketing, and then started the communications department at McDonald's. So was involved in worldwide communications, and eventually was senior vice president of worldwide communications, one of the top members of the management team at McDonald's, and became a very close personal friend of McDonald's founder, Ray Kroc. And so we'll hopefully get a chance to talk a little bit about what it was like to work for Ray and things as well. Since retiring from McDonald's, he has been involved in international consulting, working with a number of American firms, and they're working with them on their security plans and other things in Europe and Asia and the Middle East. So we're just, again, delighted that you would be here for a few days visiting with our students, and especially that you're here this morning talking to a class. So please help me welcome Dick Starmann.
Thank you.
And I guess to start off, the big question that everyone seems to have had is, how does a kid from Chicago with absolutely no connections to Ole Miss or Mississippi or anything, how do you end up here with studying journalism and marketing?
Well, it's a crazy story, because who in their right mind in the mid-1960s, who was born and raised in Chicago, would suddenly come down to Oxford, Mississippi, and because I knew nothing about the South. And of course, one of the great things, the reason I did it was because of the double major. They had an opportunity to get a major in journalism and also a major in business or marketing. And Ole Miss was one of the schools that I could find that offered such a program. So as I said yesterday in a couple of classes, I got on a plane and flew to Memphis, and then on a Trailways bus, and ended up in Oxford town. And it was one of the best things I ever did in my life. And you mentioned a number of things that happened while I was here. I had three loves at Ole Miss. The first and foremost, I met my wife here, Kathy, who was an Ole Miss student and a member of the Daily Mississippian staff, and that's how we met. She was from Vicksburg, so that was number one. Number two was working on the school paper. As Scott mentioned, Charles and I ran against each other for editor of the school newspaper, and it was a good lesson for this Yankee. Don't run against somebody who is well established and his family is well known in Mississippi. And because I always said, while I was outside trying to get in the sorority house to speak, he was giving a speech inside. And I was soundly trounced by Peanut Overby in the election. And it was a good lesson for me. And then afterwards, he asked me to be managing editor. So he won the election, then he made me do a lot of the work for him. So he's really a smart guy. And we've been good friends, and our paths have crossed with each other for, 35, 40 years out in the business world. Charles with Gannett and USA Today, and myself with McDonald's Corporation. Actually, I was thinking while we were sitting here about 15 or 20 years ago, and I don't know if you remember this, Peanut, but there was a man in Omaha, Nebraska, who was attacking McDonald's because of our French fries. And he placed an ad in the top 5 national newspapers at the time in the United States One of them was USA Today. And the headline was that McDonald's French fries are killing the children of America. And after that happened, and obviously we at McDonald's were quite upset with it, the next morning I was sitting in a chair like this and all mic'd up, except I was in New York and on the Today Show and Good Morning America and CBS This Morning defending McDonald's against the charges that this individual had made. And I also remember having a rather spirited phone call with Mr. Overby about printing that ad in the newspaper. So some good memories, even during some tough times. I don't want to take a lot of time talking about me. As Scott said, I was here in the late 60s. I went in the Army. I was in Army ROTC at Ole Miss. That was really my third love. That was kind of my fraternity. And I liked that a lot. And I enjoyed, and then I went into the Army, went to Vietnam in 1969 and 70. Was a very lucky guy, came home relatively in good shape, and went and interviewed with this old man by the name of Ray Kroc, who was actually an older man then. I was 21, 22 years old, and he was in his mid-60s. He had started a little hamburger chain with, I think most of you are too young to remember this. I can't imagine you'd know it unless you saw it in a history book. But it was an old red, white tile building with like golden neon signs over it, and there was no seating, there was nothing. There were 2 windows at the front of the building. And you'd go up and get a bag of 15-cent hamburgers, 10 cents French fries, 10 cents for a drink, and 20, I think a milkshake was 20 cents. So it was a very good value back even in those days. When I joined McDonald's in the early 1970s, they offered me a job, and I ended up in Atlanta, and I covered the entire southeast and southwestern part of the United States, from New Mexico over on the west to North Carolina on the east, all the way down to Key West, Florida. And I had a big territory. I didn't have many McDonald's. As I recall, at that time, there were 2 McDonald's in the state of Mississippi. I think there were 3 or 4 in Alabama. So I was a very lucky guy. I got to go to work for the founder of a company that was ultimately going to become a pretty big organization. I remember when I joined McDonald's, my mother was devastated. She said, "You went to college and you got a double major degree at Ole Miss and you were in the Army and things, and now you're going to work for a hamburger stand." And she was very upset. And over the years, it got better because McDonald's got a little bit bigger. Just to give you some perspective, today, there's about 37,000 McDonald's restaurants in 125 countries around the world. During my time at McDonald's, I was lucky enough to go to about 100 countries where before we opened, I was part of the pre-opening team where communications would go in and help in the development of the country before we'd start putting restaurants in. And so I was very fortunate to be involved in our international expansion and also to see most of the world except for Antarctica, I think. So, but other than that.
Sure, and you know, you started out in marketing and then moved into communications, and one of the things that you oversaw was the management of crises, things that would happen at McDonald's. What you know, comes to mind is the biggest crisis that you faced there, and what did you do and how was it handled?
Well, the last 17 years of my career at McDonald's, I was responsible for communications. I was responsible for all communications functions in the United States and internationally. I also had an additional assignment to run what was called the Crisis Task Force. Now you say, what's the Crisis Task Force? It was a small group of people in the corporate headquarters who were responsible for handling situations that would threaten McDonald's, the brand, the Golden Arches. I used to say my job was to preserve and protect the Golden Arches, to keep the shine and sparkle on them, if you will. And we took it very seriously, and we had some very serious threats. And as all of you know, and certainly your professors know, it's very easy for something to happen where all of a sudden a brand or a company can be in trouble. And probably the most significant one we had, especially in the early days that was well known, was, and again, I don't believe that any of you'd remember this because it was so long ago, but in July of 1984, a man got in his car in a little town in San Ysidro, California. It's right along the Mexican-American border. And he had 3 rifles in his arms, and he told his wife that he was going to go hunting humans. And he got in his car, and he drove 3 blocks down the street to the local McDonald's restaurant on San Ysidro Boulevard. And he walked in, and he shot 43 people. He killed 22 of them. The rest were very badly injured. At the time, it was the largest single massacre by an individual in American history. Well, you can imagine the turmoil and what happened at McDonald's. First of all, it was worldwide news. Even in 1984, without the benefit of the electronics and the media today and the different kinds of things, the next day, frankly, it was on the front page of every major newspaper in the world. Excuse me, we had the Moscow newspapers from Beijing, from Delhi in India, from Rio de Janeiro in South America, hundreds, thousands of newspapers, and it was front page story because it was a massacre that occurred in America at that time, and this was long before terrorism and 9/11. So it was a really dramatic thing. One of the first AP wire photos to ever run in color was a picture of the McDonald's massacre, and there was a little boy who was lying dead in a pool of blood underneath his bicycle, and that was also, unfortunately, in the front page of most newspapers in the world. So this affected our business. It was a terrible tragedy, and the crisis task force had to react to it very quickly. There were a lot of aspects of it. I'm not going to go into all of them, but probably the biggest thing was, what do we do with the restaurant? The restaurant was a disaster, a terrible tragedy had occurred inside. He fired over 300 rounds or 300 bullets into the restaurant, and so all the equipment and the seating was all shot up. And we had to ask ourselves 2 questions. Do we try to, once the police finish all their forensics and their CSI work, do we reopen the restaurant, get new equipment, new seating, clean it, do all the things to make it brand new again and reopen there, or do we tear it down? And I was in the school of tearing it down, although I could have argued both sides, frankly, because there were benefits to doing either one. I finally was able to convince some of the top management, especially the chairman of McDonald's, that the best course of action for us was to tear it down, get rid of it. It was the site of a horrible, horrible tragedy that was never going to change. People were always going to remember that restaurant as the site of what happened. It's kind of like ground zero, if you will, at 9/11 today. And so we decided to immediately do it. The night we made the decision, within 48 hours after the shooting, we had a construction crew tear down the restaurant, starting with the road sign at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now you say, why would you do it at 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, we didn't want camera crews filming the golden arches coming down. You can imagine all the headlines, the fallen arches, the broken arches, the bloody arches. And because the media had used McDonald's logo to describe the tragedy. A lot of the headlines were McMassacre, McMurder, and things, and they were playing on that. We tore the store down in 3 hours. By daylight, 2 days later, the store was completely torn down. We dug out the basement. We took everything, put it in trucks, took it to a facility where everything was pulverized, and then it went to 4 unknown locations in the western part of the United States. And you say, well, why did you do all that? I was very conscious of the fact, and again, I had only been in crisis management for maybe a year and a half or 2 years. So, and I will say to you, it's an art. It's not a science. It's not 4 and 4 is 8 all the time. So sometimes you just have to work on your gut instincts and your judgment. But I felt it was important that there be no souvenirs, no bricks that said this is the McDonald's massacre and those kinds of things. Because already in San Diego, people were selling T-shirts and coffee mugs and glasses with McMassacre on them, and they'd have, with a picture of people lying on the floor and different kind of grotesque stuff. But the reality was that it was out there. So we tore it down, the store, and we took everything away. And about 6 months later, we built a new McDonald's about a half a mile away. And reopened and everything was fine. If you go there today, at the original site where it happened, you'll go down San Ysidro Boulevard, you'll see a little gray building. And about a month after the incident, we gave the property, we donated the property to the city of San Ysidro. So if you go by there today and you get out and go into this little building, it's the San Ysidro Community College. And there's a little plaque on the wall that says in a kind of subdued writing, it says the site of the San Ysidro Massacre, July 1984. And it's very appropriate. It recognizes what happened there, but obviously it doesn't have any connection with McDonald's, because we always believed that McDonald's was just a victim to a degree like everybody else, because why did he pick that McDonald's? There was a big post office right next door where there were a lot of people, and the other side was a donut shop, so he could have picked either of the locations. But that was the kind of thing that we did. Not all of them were that dramatic, not all of them were that big, if you will, but we had a lot of crisis in McDonald's. You know, I tell people, today in the United States, 30 million Americans go to McDonald's every day, about 7% of America. And if the chances of something bad happening are 1,000,000 to 1, it happens 30 times a day at McDonald's somewhere in the U.S. And that's true. There's a lot of, because of the size and the numbers. There's benefits to bigness in the restaurant business or in any business, but there's also drawbacks because of the size and the numbers of things at McDonald's. There's a lot of things that happen, and sometimes they're not so good. So
when McDonald's would go into international countries, how did you learn, from a communication perspective, what types of communication were appropriate given the customs and norms and other things in the different nations?
Well, one of the things that we did in the international marketplace, we learned very quickly that the people in a particular country knew far better what to do and what not to do in that country than we did as Americans or Yankees. And we would go into a country, one of the first things we would do is seek out partners to be in the business with us. And secondly, we would actually go, and in most major countries, we would go in and select after some presentations and some scouting around, we'd select a local public relations agency to help us position ourselves in the country so that we wouldn't do something that was offensive or something that was terribly wrong, not because we wanted to, but just out of ignorance. And again, the people who knew the country the best were the people who were from that country. And from our standpoint, we would always like McDonald's to be thought of as local because all the products, all the equipment, everything in a McDonald's in another country is usually 100% from that country. I mean, it's McDonald's La Francais, McDonald's Italia, McDonald's Deutschland, McDonaldo. Is there anybody here from Japan? Okay, it's McDonaldo in Japan. And Ronald McDonald in Japan is Donald McDonald because there's no R's in Japanese. And but it works well, and it generally by listening to local people and working with the local people, because you can't come into a country. You can, but we thought it was the wrong approach. Coming into a country and starting to tell them what they would like and what they should do, rather than listening, because we learned early on that listening is a good quality when you're in the international marketplace. It's like any place, frankly, in America.
Okay. So how do you go into a large corporation, be it McDonald's or otherwise, and build your credibility, so that the people that you're working with and the management team and things like that learn to believe you, learn to trust you, learn to respect your knowledge, and especially when you're working around, people like Ray Kroc, who is, very, very demanding, very, very, interesting boss?
Well, I was very fortunate because I joined a really small little company. What we used to call it was almost operating out of a cigar box, if you will. And then it got to be bigger and bigger and bigger as time went on. And if anybody here knows anybody who works for McDonald's, if you have never asked them this question, ask them. They either love it or they hate it. There's no in between. people who work for the company for any length of time, most of them love it because of the organization, because of the people, because of what we do. It's relatively, I'm going to say, successful in terms of sales and profits. And it's a culture. It's something that it's hard to describe unless you're there. We used to call it getting ketchup in your veins. And I got ketchup in my veins. And I think I still have ketchup in my veins, even though I've been gone from there I hung up my spatula about 12 or 13 years ago and decided to do something else. But I still have great respect for McDonald's and for the people. You know, you work hard. You know, people say, oh, well, you're lucky. Well, Ray Kroc used to say, you make your luck. And you work hard. And that was true at McDonald's, not because somebody was standing over you saying you have to work hard or you have to work long hours, but because you wanted to. And then also, there was quite a bit of risk reward at McDonald's. You were expected, even though you were with what was becoming a big company, to act like an entrepreneur, to run your area, to make decisions. I never saw anybody in McDonald's in 27 years get fired for making a bad decision. I did see people leave the company because they made no decision. It was a decision-oriented organization, and you were expected to run your area. You were also expected to take risks. And that may sound funny, but you know, Ray Kroc used to say there's no risk in walking on a tightrope that's laid on the floor. And it was true. You have to take true risks sometimes in business. And you say, well, what kind of a risk would McDonald's take? Well, there were things that you take for granted today. Breakfast at McDonald's was a risk. Believe me, nobody ever heard of that. I remember when I first heard the term Egg McMuffin, and I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen or heard in my life. What are they talking about? And it was especially difficult in the Deep South, which was part of my territory, because the Egg McMuffin the ingredients were things like an English muffin. Well, what's an English muffin? There were a lot of people that didn't know what an English muffin was. And you couldn't buy them in the grocery store down here in Dixie in the Deep South. And then there was this foreign bacon, this Canadian bacon, okay? And there were different elements. So we really had a challenge to try to communicate to people what the product was. And we took risks. We invested a lot of money in the breakfast program. Now today, breakfast is over 25% of the business at McDonald's in the United States. So it's a big part of the company. But a long time ago, somebody took a risk and said, we're going to sell breakfast, and we're going to be open for breakfast. It's breakfast time at McDonald's. 1 out of 4 breakfasts eaten outside the home in the United States is eaten at McDonald's every morning. So we sell a lot of eggs and a lot of Canadian bacon and sausage and other products, obviously. So risk was I mean it as it relates to the business. And there were people who took risks. Going into a country, it may seem, you know, today it may not seem like such a risk, but I can remember when we first started talking about going into initially Europe. And you go, well, what do we do? And we went into France, and we went into Germany. And by the way, we started out, we served wine in France, and we served beer in Germany. And in the Philippines, we served spaghetti, because children love spaghetti in the Philippines. And so there were some differences, but there was some risk involved about what do you do and how do you position it. I remember when we started in Switzerland in the 1970s, and the Swiss are very proud people. They have a tradition of food. Anybody who knows anything about it, a very high tradition of food. And they accused McDonald's of culinary imperialism, okay, by wanting to open up in Switzerland. And it was a very difficult launch, and it took time. Today, Switzerland has about 300 McDonald's, which is a lot considering the population and the geography, and it's one of the highest profit countries in the world. So we were able to overcome some of those obstacles, but it was by taking risks, because you take business risks.
So what's a risk that you took or a decision that you made that turned out to be not the right one?
Not the right one. Got a lot of those. There were some times when we had some crisis situations where if I could go back, as I said, it's an art, it's not a science. And there were some times where I would change a decision or do something different. I mentioned the massacre in San Ysidro and, in 1984, and all the people killed and injured. And we thought by then we were a pretty good communications department. We had been in business a few years. We had good help from our outside agencies. I had some wonderful, talented people who worked for me. And we thought we were pretty smart and pretty good at what we did. And I remember we did 1,400 interviews in 2 days after the massacre at San Ysidro. And we were working with the big newspapers in the country, the USA Today, the New York Times, all the big papers. And we thought we were doing a pretty good job. And we were working like hell 23 hours a day. I mean, you'd go home and shower and come back and dive back in. And we thought that we had really done it well until suddenly, about 3 days later, we started getting clips. At the time, they used to get newspaper clips. And we were getting clips in Spanish and having them translated. And we found out the story they weren't getting the story right. Of all the things that we missed in communicating what happened at the massacre at San Ysidro on the Mexican-American border, we forgot about the Spanish media, the Hispanic media. And it was a major gaffe, and it was one of those crazy things that in the heat of battle, we forgot probably the most important media because of where it happened, and the story therefore was not told properly, not only in Mexico certainly, but in Central America, South America, and certain parts of Europe. So big mistake. We learned.
So were there things in that situation, were there things you did to turn the story around, or what do you do?
We worked to correct it and everything, but one of the things that it taught us, and we did this forever after that, every time we had a crisis, after the crisis was over, we'd do what I called a post-op. We'd take the crisis that had occurred, believe me, there was, without exaggerating, there were a lot of things that you've never heard about and you never will hear about, involving stuff that's bad and ugly, but one of the things that we did, regardless, every crisis, once it was over, we did a post-op. And we put it up on a board. We said, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And what would we do different? And because we wanted to try to learn from it. And we learned a hell of a lot by doing that and being critical of ourselves. By the way, everybody on the crisis task force also, somebody asked me yesterday, he said, what kind of people were they? Where'd they come from? What areas of the business? I had 2 qualifications for the crisis task force. One, you had to be smart, and 2, you had to have a lot of guts, and you had to be able to tell me or anybody what was necessary, what we had to really do, not to don't tell me something to make me happy that's wrong. Tell me what to do, tell me to help me make a better decision, because often it was my decision, because we weren't good on committees and voting and things like that at McDonald's. That was, in those days especially, I would suspect it was pretty similar at USA Today, because they were new and fresh and young, and a lot of entrepreneurs like Charles.
So you've got ketchup in your blood. Did you ever get to flip the burgers or pour a milkshake?
Absolutely. First 2 weeks at McDonald's, I worked. Who's here from Atlanta? Anybody here? Okay. I lived in Dunwoody, and I worked at is it Harper's Ferry Road in Atlanta? I worked in 1971, my first 2 weeks in the company. I worked in a restaurant, and then I went to Hamburger U. You've heard of Hamburger University. I went to Hamburger U, and I got a degree at Hamburger University. And then our executives in the company would have to go back every 5 years, and no matter what area you were in, if you were a lawyer or a communications person or whatever, and you had to do some operations training, you'd go back to Hamburger U for some refresher training. We also did something after Ray Kroc, our founder, died in 1984. In order to honor him, we started something called Founders Day. And Founders Day is every year, one day of the year, to honor our founder. Every single person at McDonald's, no matter what your job is, from the chairman of the board on down, works in a McDonald's restaurant for a day. And boy, is that an experience. Because you can think you're some hotshot lawyer or communications person or whatever, marketing person or some big executive, and all of a sudden you're at the front counter and you're going through the 6 steps and you're taking care of that customer, or you're back in the grill area. Now, they never let me go back in the grill because I screwed it up. I couldn't handle it because and by the way, who's worked at McDonald's? How many of you ever worked at McDonald's? Anybody? Boy, that's unusual in a group this size. Okay. It's tough work. It's really hard work, working in a restaurant. But anyway, once a year, all our executives do that to kind of get a sense of the business and to remind them to remember that that's where the business is. Because McDonald's can, you may know McDonald's because of the Golden Arches and because maybe some of their advertising or their promotion, or you're playing the Monopoly game now if you're a customer and you're doing all those different things. That's all wonderful. But you have to have a great product. And when you go into McDonald's, you have to have somebody greet you. They have to serve you quickly in a clean, friendly environment. They have to serve you a good, hot, tasty product. And if they don't do that, you're probably not going to come back tomorrow. I don't care how good your advertising is. Advertising and promotion and public relations, and I believe in all of those things, they help build the business. But what keeps the business is the operations in the store. You have to have it. And people are very fickle. There's very little loyalty, if you will. If you don't get a good hamburger at McDonald's, you're going to go to Wendy's or Burger King or In-N-Out Burger or one of the hundreds of competitors that are out there. So.
And I know you said you've been gone from McDonald's for about a dozen years or so, but I know you're still very close to the organization. What do you think of the things they're doing? I know in September, I believe they announced that they're putting the nutritional or the calorie count, I believe, on the actual menu boards and in the drive-thrus and things like that. Is that a good thing for them to do? And do you think that will help their business, hurt their business, or?
I think it's a good thing, but it really doesn't make any difference what I think. It makes difference what you think. Let me ask the question. If all that information is available at McDonald's, do you think you'll read it? Does anybody have any thoughts on it? Will you, won't you? You think it's a good idea? Because it's really up to the consumer about whether they'll use it. Frankly, it's been there for a long time. Now it's been reintroduced, but oftentimes people don't take the time or they don't have the interest. Is there anybody who knows they'd read it who said, I'm going to go into McDonald's and I'm going to read it? Anybody? I'm really surprised, but I'm not surprised because there's an old saying in the industry, people talk thin and eat fat. And there's a lot of truth to that. They say, well, I'm going to do this, or I'm on a diet, or I'm watching my sugar content, and all those are good things and all appropriate. But then they walk in the front door of Mickey D's and they go, oh, God, I have a Big Mac and things, and they change their habits suddenly. And I often laugh at people and laugh with them, not at them, because it's a natural tendency. They'll come into McDonald's, they'll get a Big Mac, a large fries, and a Diet Coke, and think they've done something for the world because they got this Diet Coke, and they've really helped themselves. And it's not as much impact as you might think. So,
or things like the movie Super Size Me. I mean, what impact did that have on not just McDonald's but the industry, and in terms of things they did that cause them to do things differently or rethink things, or?
It's certainly something that you take seriously. One of the things that we used to do in the old days, there would be times when things would happen, some crazy things, or people would say crazy things, and there was a tendency to kind of dismiss it because we were McDonald's and we were a large company and we were doing so well. Today, and I think for a long time, one of the things that we established in the 90s and beyond was that we take something like that very seriously and we take a look at it. Now, we don't overreact to it, but we'll certainly look at it. We'll want to make certain that it doesn't have an effect on our business, and we'll try to deal with it. And especially if you can deal with it with rational people, with a rational organization. I can remember when we had a huge controversy in the company about foam packaging in the 1990s, and it had to do with the packaging, what we called the clamshell packaging, which was the packaging for Big Macs and Quarter Pounders. And if you remember back in those days, it was foam packaging. And for 4 or 5 years, where McDonald's literally spent, I won't tell you exactly, but it's a lot. It's over $100 million, where we spent trying to convince people that the foam packaging was the best packaging. It delivered a superior product to the customer. It had moisture, heat, taste. It actually did. And by the way, it was twice as expensive than paper packaging, but we wanted foam packaging because it delivered a better product. And you get 1,000 scientists out there in this field, and I swear 500 of them say paper's better, and the other 500 say foam is better. They say foam is better because it's recyclable, and you can do something else with it. The other side says paper because it's biodegradable, and it melds into the environment and everything else. So the science was ifty-ifty, split. And we finally reached a point, and we even had on our, that worked for McDonald, we had a garbologist. Does anybody know what a garbologist is? Okay, it's somebody who, their profession is they study garbage dumps, and they study what's in them. You know what the biggest thing in a garbage dump in America today is? Anybody guess? Disposable diapers, number one. Okay, second, anybody know what's second? Charles ought to know with this one. Newspapers, you betcha. And then you go from there. But we were really very serious about this. So there was a lot of controversy. We took it very seriously. We even teamed up with I'm going to say the old saying, sleeping with the enemy. We teamed up with the Environmental Defense Fund, which they weren't the enemy, but they were a group that was opposing some of the things that we did, and we decided to work with them to try to rationally attack the problem and deal with the problem. And because, the bottom line is, and this isn't self-serving for myself or McDonald's, but McDonald's wants to do the right thing. Why would we do so? I often say to people, they say, well, you've done this and everybody hates it. And I go, why would we do that? We're in the retail business. We want you to have a good experience at McDonald's. We want you to have a good product, and we want you to feel good about it. Why would we do something that made you feel bad, or that made you feel angry, or whatever the case may be? Now, you can't make everybody happy all the time, but you can work at making most of the people happy most of the time and content. And most people, frankly, 98% of America goes to McDonald's every 6 months. That's unduplicated, okay? There's about 2% of Americans that, for whatever reason, don't go to McDonald's. But the 98% is everything from, 6 months old to 96 years old. And they like it, and they enjoy it, and they get a good value. And I'm not trying to, I could sell a few hamburgers. That'd be good for the stock. So go out and follow your instincts this afternoon, or get a filet of fish sandwich. But we really try to please all of our customers all the time, as much as you can. It's kind of one of those unreachable goals that you're never going to reach, but you're still trying to reach it.
Do you think the food industry, especially the fast food industry, has handled this pink slime controversy? Have they managed that well, or are there things they should have done differently?
I don't think it's been managed particularly well. And I don't want to get into some of the reasons because of some of the confidentiality as it relates to it. And of course, they're not the ones that gave it that name. Whoever gave it that name, okay, really was a shot in the gut to a lot of food companies, because a lot of food companies, I'm going to say, use the product. There's nothing inherently wrong with the product. It just sounds bad. Okay, and it sounds terrible. Not the pink part, but obviously when somebody says slime, you go, oh boy, slime. It's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of we thought we had conquered the testing of beef for E. coli, A157H7, which most people are aware of E. coli, and it's in beef and food products and different things. And our scientists had been working on it for years, and they came up with a technique that they thought was 100% perfect and would work 100% of the time. And I asked them, I said, so what is it? And they said, well, it's an acid wash. And I said, acid wash? And you go, we got to change acid. Acid, we got to tell people, oh, we got acid wash? You're going to put it on the boxes? This has been acid washed? Acid is a negative term. It's like slime. So we changed it. It ultimately didn't work, so it really became not an issue. But we changed acid to vinegar. So because by the way, you know this in studying communications and public relations and journalism, that words are powerful and words mean a lot. And they meant a lot in our business. They mean a lot in a lot of businesses. Say different things.
We've got just a few minutes left, and wondered if you could share with us, if you could rewind your career and do anything differently. Can you think of things you would have perhaps done differently than you did?
Very little. Again, I think I was a very lucky guy because I ended up at Ole Miss, and I really didn't know everything that I was going to get into here, and I mean that in a positive sense. And so I was very fortunate to, if I left my comfort zone of Chicago, where I grew up and I was born and raised in big city, and you know, when I first came here, my nickname, I think Charles remembers, they used to call me the Yank. I was the Yankee because of the way I talked, but I think I was very fortunate to come to a place like Ole Miss, and then I say the same thing, and I'm not trying to be, you know, airy-fairy. I think I was lucky to be in the Army. That was a great experience for me. I certainly was lucky when I was in Vietnam because I wasn't seriously wounded or hurt, and a lot of guys, you know, 58,000 guys died in Vietnam. People forget how big that was in terms of a war. And then I was lucky at McDonald's. Sure, I was lucky I met Ray Kroc, but I was lucky I joined an organization where you could really get into it, and you could have a, you know, because I say to you, you're 3, 4, 5 years, you're all going to be out in that world in some capacity, in business or journalism or the different fields that you might go into. And business can be fun. Business can be really interesting. Business can be very captivating. You know, there's an old saying, find the job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And I'd even put someone on the spot and say to Charles, isn't that true? Did you feel that way for 35 years or 40 years that you worked for Gannett? Because you loved your job. You loved what you did. And it can be that way. Don't make business and don't make your career miserable. You know, do what you want in life. I have 2 children. One especially, and then the second one. I have a boy and a girl, and both of them wanted to be in the Secret Service. They want to be Secret Service agents. My son, from the time he was 7 years old, he wanted to be a Secret Service agent. I used to tell him, I say, if you do, you better stay out of trouble, because it's pretty tough. Today, he's 16 years with the Secret Service. He's been on the White House detail for 6 years under President Bush's last term, and now he's guarding Governor Romney and has been with him since February. He got to do what he wanted. And here's a guy who loves his job. Okay, he can't wait to go into the White House and go and be with Laura Bush or be with President Bush at the time when he was at the White House. And now he works with the Romneys and is one of the senior people on their protective detail. And he loves his career, you know. So everybody doesn't have to do hamburgers, and everybody doesn't have to do this or that. You pick your path. You plow your own field, but it can be fun. And make sure you like it. Make sure it's something that interests you. I think if you talk to any of us, whether it's Scott or Charles or any of the other professors in the room, they tell you the same thing. Because like one of the reasons why they're here is because they love working with students. Because if you didn't love working with students, why would you do this? You know, and I can understand the great am I right? The satisfaction that you get, you know, you probably give them more than they give you. I'll even go to that step because, you know, there's satisfaction in helping people grow. And I found that in business too.
So what do you think, you know, that our students will be looking for jobs within a couple of years? What are the top couple of skills, things that they really need to know to succeed?
There's one big thing that I've said this in a couple of classes. If I've seen you in class the last 2 days, I apologize for repeating myself. But I think the most important thing for you at some point in your, what year are most of the students here?
I think a lot of freshmen, but there's some others as well.
Oh, freshmen even better. Start working on interviewing skills, on writing skills, on speech skills. One of the good things I did at Ole Miss, I screwed up when I ran for editor of the newspaper, but one of the positive things that I did is I took every speech course I could find here, and it wasn't required for my degree, because I thought it was important that I learn and do a better job communicating. And the professors in the school, in the journalism school, that Charles well remembers because we were here together, and from Sam Shepard to Dr. Hoare and some of those people, were really very tough on us on writing. And we'd write something and we'd rewrite it and we'd rewrite it and we'd work on words and sentences and structure. And I still do it today. I'm an editor. I edit, I re-edit, and because words are powerful, sentences are powerful, and if you can develop some interviewing skills, you're going to be way ahead of many of your contemporaries, because you're going to have 4 years of education or 5 years of terrific education. You're going to learn a hell of a lot. And then you're going to have an opportunity to tell someone about yourself in order to get a position, in order to join an organization or whatever. And so often I've seen in my career where people come from fabulous programs, fabulous schools. It's Ole Miss in the South, or it's Dartmouth in the East, or it's Notre Dame in the Midwest, or whatever, very fine schools. And these are really bright young people, and they're terrible at interviews. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to sell themselves. They don't know how to talk to somebody. And there's techniques, there's books. I don't know if there's classes here on how to interview. But it's like, I call it the red zone of life. It's the last 10 or 20 yards. It's before touchdown. And you've got all this knowledge, you've spent all this money, you've taken all this time. Then you have to be able to sell yourself and let somebody know why you're a good bet for their company or their organization. And oftentimes young people don't take that last step, and therefore they don't present themselves in the best light, and it hurts the start of their career. I'd learn how to interview. I'd get on the internet, I'd read books, I'd practice. As I said, if there were classes somewhere that were available on how to interview better, take them. It's time well worth it.
We've got just time to go, but one last question. Do you still eat at McDonald's?
Yeah, about probably 3 days a week, generally. I usually have breakfast there, certainly one morning, sausage and biscuit, and which I love. And I have breakfast probably at least 1 day a week, and then I'll have lunch probably twice a week. Depends upon what's on the menu too. Because like when McRib comes back, I love McRib, and I'll have a McRib, and I love a daily double. And yeah, I'm a customer. A customer, a stockholder, and an old hamburger guy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.